morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome to the double symposium about women leaders of the International Association of the Schools of Social Work. My name is Darja Zaviršek, and I'm the chair of the Women Interest group which organized this symposium. The co-chair of Women Interest group is also here, Frankfurt. Not only that we are celebrating the 90th anniversary of the International Association of the Schools of Social Work, but we are also celebrating the 34th anniversary of the first women Cocos within the IASSW. And the next speaker will talk more about that. But before going to that, I would like to go through a few issues to frame the symposium. So one is that keeping the memory is extremely important. Eric Hobsbawm's classical work speaks about collective memory. He said that if only one person remembers, the memory and the stories and the events fall in oblivion. But if we all remember, if the memory becomes a collective memory, then it stays and it goes on. And so one of the reasons why we want to hold this symposium is to keep the memory. Social work is still a young profession. So it was only recently that we started to think about our collective memories and also individual memories, and also the memory and the stories and the history of our profession and the history of the pioneers. Although social work is everywhere, almost everywhere, the female-based profession, it is not necessarily that women who were the founding members, or the founders of the profession in most parts of the world, that they have an easy go when they are in leadership. So from methodologically, we need to look at the personal stories, narratives, oral histories, but also we want to show you some visual material, because the visual goes often even deeper than the oral, and the visual, keeping the documentations is extremely important when we look at the histories. The question about the leadership is very often absent from women identities. And when women who came into profession and women who made great leaderships in profession very often say, I'm not a leader, or I never thought about myself to being a leader. And sometimes women say things just happen. But in order to have, but today we have here a group of, we have 8 leaders who were either presidents of IASSW or they served in different capacities in women committees, think tank groups, task force groups, etc. And also in their other tasks as educators, as professors, as social work educators, as global networkers, as authors of numerous books. These are women who are leaders. And leadership is important for the future women to come. And we know that there are huge differences around the situation of women across the globe. Nevertheless, I strongly believe that we do need more women models, role models, and so this symposium is not only to keep the collective memory of IASSW history alive, but also to show that in the 80s, when actually the women's history started to become an issue at the universities among educators, that women from IASSW actually were very much in front of that, keeping the women's history. And also that we want to show for the future generation and for the younger colleagues who are in leadership or not yet, what does it mean? And what are the achievements, but also barriers, obstacles, and personal narratives. Just before I give the words to one of the former IASSW president, I want to show you the picture of the first president of IASSW, Mrs. Salomon. She was German, Jewish German, and traveled a lot and was a great leader. She held the first PhD in economics 1908 and founded the School of Social Work in 1912 in Berlin. And she also, I'm coming from Eastern Europe, and I was fascinated to know that not only that she traveled across the United States and was a great friend with Jane Addams and other leaders, but she also traveled to Eastern Europe and was very much aware of the differences, but also the difficulties that the political changes brought in. And I want to show you the first IASSW conference book from 1928, which is, I think we can be really proud of our long history. Social work made within 80 years, if I look at this picture from 2009, a huge development. On this picture we made, there was a big celebration of inauguration of the international doctoral program in social work, and on the picture you can see many, the former and current presidents and also other well-known members of the IASSW, and some of you are also here in the room. So I think to look at the span of 80 years, I think it's fascinating to see that how much we achieved in education. Okay, so our panelists today are listed here. Lena Dominelli, Carolyn, Julia Watkins, Lynne Healy, Vishanthie Sewpaul, Annamaria Campanini, Angie, Yuen, who sent us the video, she cannot be with us, and Vimla, Nadkarni, who also sent us a video because she cannot be with us today. I would like to ask Lena to come. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Darja. Can you go to the first slide that you had, the very first one? That one, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all awake. I'm going to be talking, the walking, talking, sleeping beauty. I'm not doing it, I'm not sleeping, but I will as I continue. I would like you all just to stand up for a moment to honor our women and our history and talk to each other, just say hello to each other. And especially if you don't know the person next to you. Because we always tend to talk to people we know. Give each other a hug. Because we are fantastic as women. Yes. Look at us. Collective action. Thank you. I'm sorry to say, can you please now sit down? Down, please, thank you. spontaneously. Because we do have power, but we often don't think about it. And what I'm going to do is focus on the personal stories and narratives and some of the oral history, because I've suddenly realized I'm becoming history. Passé. The future is all of the young people in this room, young at heart and young in age, and young in careers. But I came to IASSW as a disabled person. I was in a wheelchair, and it was one of the ones that did not have a motor, so my husband was pushing me around Montreal, 1984. The first IASSW conference I ever went to. I had no idea what to expect. And I had not, because I'm a sociologist originally, and then became a community development worker and social worker and probation officer, blah, blah, blah. I suddenly met my Canadian, there are a few Canadians in this room, my Canadian colleagues in social work for the first time in my life. And they were looking at me. I come from the west coast of Canada originally, and they said, "What do you do?" When we started talking, and they said, "Oh, we're fed up. It's been over 30 years since there's been a woman president here. Nobody talks about women's issues. We're organizing, so we want you to come to that," because they were older than me, and you're young, right? So the baton gets passed on. So my poor husband, we went, I don't know, around the houses 25 times before we found this room. He dropped me off because he's very shy. And I stand here today also disabled, as you can see, because I fell. My husband had to do up my shoelaces this morning before I could come in, but he's disappeared. He is not going to stay here and kind of like be obtrusive. But we need men allies. We really do. But anyway, to get back to 1984, so they welcomed me into the room, and I sat, I don't remember where, and Joan Gilroy and Marilyn Callahan, a great friend of mine, really got up and started talking about how important it was for women to organize. This was the first introduction to feminist activism, because I'd been a socialist activist before. You know, class was really important. And then suddenly my eyes were open. Gender was equally important. I knew ethnicity was, because being a first generation immigrant in Canada, my parents, who spoke English with a funny accent, certainly got the message, and so did I as their oldest child. And I thought, well, I knew about that, but gender, I knew about it personally, because my mom kept saying, "You can't do that, you're a girl," and I kept doing it because I was a girl. So I was a native or a normal, natural feminist from birth. I found out later. But anyway, these women said, "So you've got to come, you've got to do this, you've got to do that." So I just sat there in my wheelchair and nodded. Listened very intently, and Joan Gilroy got elected as the first Women's Caucus chair. And she's a fantastic woman. She's still around in Dalhousie. She's retired. She's been retired for many years, but she's still very active. And I remember her fantastic little house in Nova Scotia, in Halifax. And she was trying to mentor, but I didn't realize she was mentoring me. And so was Marilyn. Because I just took it for granted, right, that everybody supports everybody. That's part of the socialist ideal. What was different? And I'd been brought up as a socialist from my dad. But anyway, the story goes on. So Joan led for 2 years, did an excellent job, and then in Tokyo, 1986, Joan says, "I'm not doing it anymore. It's time for you guys to elect a new chair." And because I never shut my mouth, I got elected as the chair. And from 86 to 1990, and in 88, I became pregnant. I was 7 months pregnant in Vienna. I was still the chair. I was trying to get rid of the chair because I wanted to spend time with my, well, I didn't know if it was going to be a boy or a girl then, because I didn't want to know. It was a son. I was 7 months pregnant, and I was kind of wearing a dress that just came straight down, so nobody could tell. Yes, we do that, don't we? Now that you can flaunt it, but you couldn't in those days, so I didn't feel I could. And Marilyn was still there, Marilyn Callahan, and she said, "Okay, we're going to have a meeting, we're going to raise a list of 14 demands, we raised the list, 14 demands to take to President Ralph Garber. One of those demands was that women should have a seat on the board, 1988. And the other one was that eventually there had to be women leading the profession again, as they had, as you saw Alice Salomon, but there hadn't been a woman leader since, as president, since Eileen Younghusband, and her period ended in the early mid-60s because she died in the US in a car accident in 1980. But anyway, we wanted this kind of change, so we had a list of 14 demands, and I'll always remember Marilyn Callahan saying, well, there she was, there was Lena, 7 months pregnant, being vintage Lena. We went, here are our demands, I was saying to Ralph Garber, and he says, demands? We only make requests. But demands kept coming in. We eventually, and I have to say, Carolyn Noble is here, from 1990 to 92, Janice Wood-Wetzel and Carolyn Noble and a whole range of other women that I don't have time to mention, were really active in trying to get our demands met. So in 92, when we went to the Washington Congress, the 3 of us got together and wrote a statement, and I don't remember who wrote the statement because it was all collaborative, yeah. And that was the big lesson. We cannot achieve anything except through collective action as women. We need our men allies too. We needed them speaking up in Washington, and a lot of them did. Even though I said to one of them, who was my friend Friedrich Siebel from Germany, I said, I hope, I've forgotten the word he used, I don't know if you remember, and I said, I hope that's just a problem of language, because he's a German speaker, not an English speaker, as his first language, and he said it was, because I don't remember, it was inappropriate to use that word with women. And he said, yes, you need to realize that you are privileged. Well, actually, English isn't my first language, but never mind, you wouldn't notice. So anyway, we had a great discussion, and we got past the fact that there would be a place on the board, and it changed from the Women's Caucus to the Women's Interest Group at that point, 1992. And the first chair of the Women's Interest Group, were you the co-chair? Yeah, was Janice Wood-Wetzel, who was also then the editor of Ophelia. And so we started writing some women's history in Ophelia and all the rest of it. The thing went from strength to strength, and I'm going to leave it for you to talk about the rest of the history, because it goes on to the present day. But I just want to say the lesson, the take-home message from what I have had to say is that without collective action and without our allies, we cannot achieve the change we want. And the key thing for me as a feminist is social action and social change. We do not want a world where one group is lording it and empowering themselves by holding power over others. We want shared power, equality, social justice, all the things. When you read what Alice Solomon said many, many years ago, over 100 years ago, it was exactly what most of us are using today. The language might be a little bit different because we modernized our language a bit, but otherwise it's exactly the same. And it really pains me to say we still haven't got our 14 demands. And I wish I brought them with me, but they're in some box somewhere. They're in the archives in Minnesota because I sent them there. But they would have to be looked at for us. So thank you, Darja. Who's next? Oh yeah, I have 2 more minutes. Well, I'll stop now.
Thank you. Probably, Lena, you don't know this photo from 2006. So the next speaker is Carolyn Noble. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Lena. I met Lena in the ladies when she was 7 months pregnant, and I knew that because she was being sick in the toilet. We've had a lot of collaboration through the women's seat on the IASSW. It was hard for me to prepare this talk because it's all about history now, and it's looking back, and I feel quite sad. all of a sudden you reach an age, and the future is shorter than the memories are longer. And so we thank Darja and Fran for getting us together to record the history of at least a small part of IASW's strong women's leadership. In some ways, women's lives are complex, and you can't talk about your own success without, or failures, without looking at the context on which we were born. Now, I was born post-war in Australia, which has been the most settled and peaceful part of the world during my whole 68 years. So in some ways, that privilege was afforded to me by happenstance. You just get born where you get born, and you then have to live within that context. And so I feel when I look back over my journey, is that a metaphor came to mind that I was sitting on a surfboard, if you like, in a huge, big, tumultuous sea, and I caught a wave, and the wave was the 1968 revolution of social movements, particularly the women's movements, of which I was exposed to on the very first day I went to university. I'd gone from a Catholic middle-class school, I went to university, and there was the biggest student revolt I've ever seen. And I have been part of that wave and that success ever since. Not only did it propel me into being aware of the women's collective and the power, if you like, of the critique of the traditional homemaker, dependent role that women were fighting against, it also introduced me to the social justice, the peace, the humanity, if you like, of the social work profession. And so, carrying that awareness from my social work degree, I then got on the boat and went to England, and I arrived in 1972 just when the case come, and the social workers were on strike. And I thought, oh my gosh, how exciting was that social workers were standing up for anti-capitalism and a much fairer, involvement with the service users, and indeed, and the politicalisation, if you like, of social work. I then moved into psychiatry, and the anti-psychiatry movement actually sprung up right within my rebrief, and the walls of psychiatry were broken down, community work blossomed, and I was a part of that energising. And then I came back to Australia, and I wanted to get out of the intensity of direct work, but I already had 3 children by then, and a colleague of mine who had 2 children, we thought, we'll try for a job in academia. But because we had 5 children between us, we couldn't work full time, so we applied for and got the first job share in the Australian institution. And so we managed to step into an academic role, and of course, gradually, bit by bit, the world just opened up. It didn't just open up without effort. I had to, with my colleagues, work at it. So you have to, not only do you have to sort of prove yourself better than men, you have to actually take on the challenge that the institutions throw at you. And so rather than sort of battle against the hegemonic and masculine climate of universities in the 80s, it was dominated by men. I mean, you didn't mention that.
Because I'd be talking
forever. But not only was the board, the international board, dominated by men, the AASW, the Australian educators, and the auxiliary NGOs were all dominated by men. It was hugely masculinist, and it was, difficult to see our ways through. So with my colleagues, friends here, we actually created a parallel universe for ourselves. We joined in the affirmative action and the equal opportunity agenda. I became chair of the EEO of the university and was part of putting in policies for workplace practices, childcare, part-time work, job share, the sorts of environment, if you like, that made it easier for women's academic success. But also, you remember, Fran, that there was no opportunities for publishing. So we set up our own group. We established our own Women in Welfare Education group. We set up our own journal, Women in Welfare Journal, that went right through to 2011, and we got ourselves published. We also set up a network of women mentors where we told each other, no matter what, we had to get that PhD. I know it was going to be difficult, but we mentored ourselves through the challenge of rearing kids, and all of us, I think, got our PhDs, and that enabled the success, if you like, into our promotional opportunities. Once our children grew up, we were freer, if you like, to actually move around, and the international world was something that just fascinated me. I just was involved in Iassw, as you say, from 1988, when I first took my overseas trip and became involved in the Women's Caucus Chair. But also I assumed a leadership role in my national group, and therefore that gave you a seat on the chair. I was also part of the organising committee for the 2004 Australian Conference, and that gave you a seat on the chair. And then post something, I became involved in publication and got involved in recording some of the history, and also extending the publication opportunities to colleagues around the world with the Global Book and the Voices book, and in the Asian Pacific book on supervision and field education. So I'm rambling a bit, and it's a sad time in a way to actually look back over the achievements with the future ahead of us. And I just want, I don't have my time going, I just wanted to promote, it is a time for history. So the Australian academics actually got together, and we got our book, Radicals in Australian Social Work. So you had to be over 65, so that sort of it's an age. But we wanted to capture as many stories of people coming up for retirement. So I would encourage you to do the same, is to get your colleagues who are still able to write and use their computers and record your history. And in this history, of which I've got a chapter on women's leadership, it's much more nuanced about how leadership has actually been enacted in social work in Australia. But the successes of each of us only realised when we had the collective book together. We worked to save Medicare. We were active in the gay and lesbian rights movement, in the peace movement, in the women's movement. And it was a shock to actually see how much was achieved over the last 40 years. In the last heads of school of Australia, most of the women were heads. There were 3 men out of the 26 or so. Whereas when I started, there would have been 3 women out of the 26 men. So while the numerical change has happened, I'm not that hopeful that the period that I talked about, which was that wave of success, is actually available for the younger women. Because I think the backlash has been huge and almost vicious in its attack on women's achievements. And in some ways, we've got to start again. So I just want to read something depressing. Can I do that? I talk better when I read, it's my style. So, where to now with regard to feminism and social work? As women begin to dominate the social work professoriate, another wave of feminist backlash begins in earnest. And with the recent election of a misogynist world leader in the United States, all indications are that the backlash is global. The resentment of women's authority in general and women holding power over men. Women holding power over men specifically was always a bitter struggle, and still results in questioning, debating, and in some cases exposing women leaders to debasement. Our first woman Prime Minister, Julia Mitchell, will be remembered for the slogan, "Ditch the Witch." The stranglehold of neoliberalism and new public management in all spheres of work, both public and private, is another factor that undermines feminist contribution to empowering workplaces for women. During the last 25 years of my academic career, I can count at least 8 restructures across 3 institutions that immediately come to mind. Many of the proposed changes, redundancies and refiguring of discipline groupings were resisted, but most of these were eventually successful. Many more have slipped my consciousness as I currently face yet another restructure, and this time it's more serious. The redundancies offer across the faculty of which I was head. Middle management, up to 50 women were displaced within a 3-month period. Many see the new public management as heralding and now responsible for the morally conservative and repressive social, political and cultural forces that plague the higher education sector. Neoliberalism has been linked with reinvigorating a white patriarchy and counteracting social and political gains attributed to feminist activism. Why am I still shocked by the violence of neoliberalism and the return to patriarchy? In many ways there was a perfect storm in the making. On the one hand, the new public management with the global capital posing a threat to environmental sustainability and world peace. Many women are wondering how we can even think about women's issues given the state of the world and the potential catastrophe that we are facing. Add to this mix a general pessimism as feminists ask what exactly has been achieved in the last 4 decades. We get some glimpses as to why feminism has lost its edge. In retrospect, the diversity of women issues meant that a clear end point was never really defined. It was always going to be difficult. Despite the diversity though, what was clear was that women's discrimination and subordination to male power and control was and is unacceptable. Men's violence was not to be tolerated and unpunished, and gender egalitarian politics was and is to be fought at every opportunity. And at the time, the personalist and political must inform each and every woman's political politics. Just briefly, I have, at the end of my career, been a part of changing some institutional politics, have in some ways been part of redistributing the gender inequalities, and have actually contributed to gender theory and gender debate, and have hopefully enabled a lot of my colleagues to publish and to move through their careers through mentoring. But these changes can be directly attributed to my belief totally in feminist activism as a real discourse for empowering women. But what about the current backlash and conservative male power plays evident in the current politics of the West? Where will we find strong feminist voice to counteract this backlash? Certainly there is a strong online presence of young women speaking about the rise of the new patriarchy. I can find women's voices and activism on Facebook and other social media sites where gender equality, social justice for women and girls, where there is anti-bullying and shaming sites are quite effective in protecting women from men's violence. So as retirement looms, I'm happy to be able to hand over to the younger feminists to define the future, what might be tailored for them, and also to actually find a strong voice for older women. But just to finish up, I don't want to be too depressive, but the Women's March in 2017, the same slogans were there as with the Feminist March in 1968 when I entered university. So while I feel as I've reaped a ride of success, affirmative action, of positive gender policies, and an academic opening up for women, I really encourage the younger women to actually learn from our successes and our failures and not to be intimidated by what I see is a real return back to the status quo of when I entered the university in 1968.
Thank you very much. I think it's really important, Lena and Caroline, that you remind us how much feminist issues and being aware of women's issues have to do with social injustice. The bigger the social inequalities, the more the social inequalities are growing in the world, the more we will face women being seen as the scapegoats of the global inequalities. Thank you. The third speaker is Julia Watkins.
I'm going to go to the podium and be just a little more formal because I've got to punch the computer and I have to look at my notes. I'm delighted to be here with you this morning, and part of what I will be saying will resonate very clearly with what Lena and Carolyn have already said, but there are other takes on the information. Are you timing this, or do you want me to start my stopwatch? Oh, sorry. I don't want the alarm clock, I want the stopwatch. That may help. Today I'm going to broaden my discussion a little bit today and take a little bit different look at it. I'm going to go beyond IASSW as you have in a way, although the history of both of you with IASW has been much more extensive than my history with IASSW. I've had some 30 plus years in educational administration, both in public and private universities, in higher education, the executive director of a national organization in the United States, and 10 years as the administrator, the president of the American University in Bulgaria, and then only 4 years as the elected treasurer of IASSW. So you'll understand why I'm going to take a little bit different tactic here. First of all, I'm going to start by telling a few stories. Again, it's commonly acknowledged that we're the stories we tell, of course, and we also recognize the importance of those stories where being a woman is really key. It's not enough, and we need to move beyond being a woman is the key variable to what we're going to do about that. But first, I think we have to understand the stories and the strength of them, as my colleagues have already suggested. And then after the stories, they've got to lead somewhere, and I'll use that to sort of summarize a few points that I've learned over a very long lifetime. My first academic job, I was 30 years old. I had a PhD. And I had followed my husband to a university across the country from where I was born and raised, and decided that he would take the first academic job. I was at home in this new community. He called me. He said, "Dear," I think he called me dear then. He still does. He still does. He said, I think I've heard that there's a job teaching social work. And it's in the Department of Sociology. Maybe you'd like to call about it. I picked up the phone, I called, and the woman, later I understood she was a secretary to the department. She said to me, I said, I understand, this was 1971. She said, I said, I understand there's a possible temporary teaching job in social work in the department. She said, "My dear, we're looking for someone with a PhD. Temporary appointment, salary, disputable." But it was a given. I said, "Well, I have a PhD." She said, "Aha, I'll go talk to the department head." So a minute later, "My dear, the department head would like to meet with you." Okay, that was the beginning. That's how it began. Then, 3 months into that temporary job, I was pregnant, our first child. Wow. Oh, I went to the department head, who was a new department head by then, but a man. And I said, "Well, Professor, I'm pregnant. I'm expecting the baby in April. Let's talk about how we're going to handle that." He said, "Oh, we'll find a replacement for you.
No.
We understand these things." I said, "Oh, well, you know, I'll take 2 weeks off, and then I'll return and finish the semester," which I did. So you're beginning to see the pattern. Your pregnancy? Yeah. Then there was some differentiation began, but this is very personal. Our oldest son, who's now a 45-year-old man, would answer the home phone, and before cell phones, of course, and he became very funny about it. he would pick up the phone and he would say, Department of Human Services. And then when the caller would ask to speak with Dr. Watkins, he would say, do you want to talk to my mom or my dad? Bravo, bravo. Here we go, Matt. Good progress. There are other stories. I recently inquired, and this will lead somewhere in a few minutes. I recently inquired of the current president of the American University of Bulgaria about getting a copy of the document that I would thought would be held in the institution's archive. He was not able to find it, and he said in an email, there have been many presidents since you left AUBG. In fact, there have been 8 since I left, and that was 15 years ago. Since you left, and for a number of them, they thought the history of the institution began with their arrival. There are tales from search committees where a colleague and I, the only 2 women on the committee, would sit down at the beginning of the process, and one professor, he announced at the first meeting that he would not support anyone coming from a background in women's or minority studies. And, you know, these were not true disciplines. These were not true disciplines. Well, all we felt like was, okay, we know where you stand. We know where you stand. But other than that, we didn't say much. But that was really helpful information to have as that search progressed and as other searches progressed. When I was the president of AUBG, I was also affiliated with an association called the Association of American International Colleges and Universities. It's probably on my bio. And we would have meetings once a year. And one of the institutions would host a meeting, and we would go, and we would convene around these big tables, these big conference tables, and the host institution always had a gift for everyone. And at one of these, I sat down, and lo and behold, there were logo neckties at every place. and I said out loud, I said, oh, am I to wear this, or should I give this to my husband? Well, after the break, there was a teacup with a logo on it. But what happened was, the change was, there were not gender-related gifts after that point. There was a sensitivity then about it. And finally, my final story that I want to tell right now is being the IASSW treasurer. That meant, of course, understanding numbers, budgets, profit and loss statements, annual financials, audit process, and results, among other things. My social work preparation had not prepared me for all of that, but my experiential preparation had, of course, prepared me for that. But I also took advantage of a number of programs through the American Council on Education and the Harvard Management Institute to learn all of that stuff. So I didn't feel disempowered by a financial statement. I knew what I was looking at. But that was an important one. So you get the picture. It's about credentials and salary. It's about pregnancy and parenthood. It's about doing the service and care work of the Academy, by the way. It's about affirmative action, which was 1967, as you pointed out. And it's about power and authority. It's about the gendering of power and authority, those gendered ways of projecting authority. It's about those microaggressions, the jokes, the persistent insensitivities. It's about things like mansplaining, as they say now. And Caroline, I was so interested. There was an advertisement, the University of Adelaide, that has been criticized broadly because it's a man talking to a group of women students. And they've taken it down.
Degree mansplaining.
Yeah. Degree mansplaining. Yeah. So where does this all take us? And I'm about to the end. I will go quickly. In terms of what we know about leadership. Now let's see if I can hit this. Partnerships and collaboration are helpful. They sometimes are a disaster, but when they work really well, and something we all should strive for. This is the ISW, the international organizations, you know them. Now, I also think integrity is a winner every time, and I happen to like Angela Merkel, and I happen to like Barack Obama. Stand always on those basic ethical principles of our profession: service, social justice, the importance of relationships, honoring the worth and dignity of every human being, seeking community and sustainability. Here are some of our current social work leaders that I think. Oh, you want to see that one again? I couldn't resist it. I'm sorry. It'll take me a minute more here. These are some of our current leaders. And then I also think being humble is a really good characteristic. This is a dangerous slide for me to show, but I'll tell you why I've got it. This was President Clinton and a visit to Bulgaria in 1999. But I'm showing it because this young guy, a student at the American University, a very humble guy, is now the mayor of Pristina, Kosovo, and his colleagues are in the parliament in Kosovo. But humbleness really works. And by the way, aside from what we know about Clinton, he was very humble with the students and very good with them. So, and I felt humbled by his presence. So there you've got that one. Decision making, I have this mantra. Don't make a decision today that you can put off until tomorrow. Now, being a woman and saying that could be characterized as indecisiveness, and you want to be really, really careful with it. And my slide, let's see, this is another one with humbleness. Catherine Kendall, Jane Addams, Alice Solomon, okay? Now, to catch up with decision making, this is how I feel about decision making. Another aspect of decision making, don't take anything for granted, keep all the doors open and remain flexible. I always ask myself, is this the hill I want to die on? I've discovered over time that most are not, and I've also learned another lesson, very aptly put by the late Stephen Sample, who was the president of the University of Southern California. Know which hill you're willing to die on, and keep its exact location to yourself. So, almost there. What about context? Very, very important. Know your context, otherwise you can unravel without even understanding that you're unraveling. But because you're open and flexible, you're not in a rush to make decisions. You'll know the context and understand it before you make those decisions. So this is context, today's context, and here's another one I had to share. This is about context. It's also about place, and it's about time. Now, history does matter. I loved what Mary Robinson said, quoting from Desmond Tutu, I am because you are. And we all know the saying that we stand on the shoulders of others who have come before us. That said, there's nothing more demoralizing to leaders and constituents than retracing the same path over and over again. That's part of our depression at this point in time, I believe, and not moving beyond those early understandings. I have two pictures here, and I'll tell you what they are because I couldn't get them in focus. One is a library, stacks, and the other is the Elmer L. Anderson Library that houses the social welfare archives, and Lynne knows that one very, very well. Even blurred is familiar, right? And then I want to say something about mentoring and the future. I believe in the power of mentoring. I think it makes a huge difference, but it does extract from each of us a promise to set aside our egos, listen well, and be available. This is a picture of a group of women from Southeast Europe, some of whom are here today, that we've been supporting over the last 5 to 7 years, promoting their academic success. And I also believe, no mistake about it, education makes a huge difference. You know that, I know that. My my belief in it is strong and unequivocal. It is transformative. There's no question about it. This is a woman graduating first class from the American University in Bulgaria. She's a leader in the Green Party now in Bulgaria. This is a group that Anna Šobašan brought from Slovenia to World Social Work Day in Sarajevo a few years ago. And this is a group of graduates from the American University. Now, I have to do one more thing, and then we will stop. I want you to hear this. Voice counts. Make your voice count. And finally, be the woman who fixes another woman's crown without telling the world that it was crooked. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. So our next speaker is Lynne Healy.
Greetings, everybody. This is really difficult because I had, well, first of all, it was just difficult to figure out what to say because Darja really wanted us to speak in a very personal way, and I think that is extremely difficult. I have no problem standing up in front of 500 people giving an academic paper, but to speak personally is much, much harder. And then everything that the women who went before me said has resonated and makes me want to throw away my little piece of paper and comment on what they said. So I can't resist starting with just a few things resonating from what some of the other women said, the kind of stories very early in my career. I remember going on my first little business trip to a board meeting in Washington on the airplane. I was probably in my late 20s. I was dressed very professionally, much better than today, with a suit and, you know, clothes make the woman sometimes. And the plane was almost all men. It was an early morning flight to Washington. And my seatmate looks at me and says, "So, are you on your way to visit your mother?" And I said, "Why, no, are you?" One of the things that's kind of plagued me in my career is I tend to be very naive about things. And I remember my very first job interview for a social work job before I had any training. Went for a public child welfare job, and there was this elderly woman sitting behind the desk. She didn't even look up. She was staring down at my papers. And she said, "We don't like to hire single women." And very naively and cheerfully, I said, "Oh, that's no problem. I'm getting married in 9 weeks." And she looked up and she said, "We don't like to hire married women either." So anyway, I mean, anybody my age has lots and lots and lots of those stories. And I also had the story of going into my dean and saying, "I'm pregnant," and he said, "I have no idea what to do. We have no policy." And he finally said, "Keep it to 4 weeks, we won't tell anybody." Okay. So what I really was going to kind of think about, what I have been thinking about from the more personal perspective, is how do you have a career that leads you somehow into positions that at least other people classify as being leadership positions. And in spite of what I think Lena might have said in the beginning, to some extent, for me at least, I think it was, has been an accidental process in terms that opportunities or doors opened and I walked through. I didn't necessarily pull them open. I didn't necessarily always choose the doors. And maybe there were other doors that I never saw that were also open that wouldn't have led me in the same place. I think what led me into my leadership position, if that's what it was, in IASSW, it happened really, I came into my own, I think, during my MSW program. I was really shy throughout university, and I'm sure those of you who served on the board with me wish I still was. I rarely spoke up, but somehow I came across a poem, and I wish I could remember the famous author who wrote it, but talked about claiming your own life and speaking and finding your voice. And I decided at the age of about 25 that maybe it was time to begin to do that. So two things at least happened that led me here. I went to my MSW program after a few years in the field as an untrained social worker, and I really wanted an internship with a women's organization. Instead, they put me with the local chapter of our professional association, the NASW in the US. I was very disappointed, but through that process, two things happened to me. I became thoroughly convinced of the importance of professional associations and of having like a two-part career. You had your job, and then you had your volunteer responsibilities that we all need to do to make our profession grow and be strong. Then I also happened to have a professor who was really interested in international issues. Very rare in the early 1970s in the United States. We had really gone into a very isolationist time. And she had me accompany her to the Hong Kong IASSW conference in 1980. So those things, in a sense, were accidental. The first one was one I didn't want at all, but they really led me to where I am today. The other thing I think happens is that we are, and I have some pictures here of a number, and several of you have stressed this, of wonderful women who've led in the IASSW. And I wasn't really, you can, flip through them and I'll tell you when to kind of stop a bit. This is another position, a picture of Alice Solomon in her roles with the International Council of Women. She was such a strong feminist. She's the one on the end in the bottom. But we really are standing on the shoulders of people who were giants in our field, brave, visionary women, for whom many of them, their careers were nowhere near as accidental as mine. I think they had to strive and fight and know where they wanted to be. This is a group, 1946, many of our founders are in here. If any of you can specifically identify who's who, that would be wonderful. But they got together right after the war. All of them here, Europeans who faced incredible devastation, lost family. I don't think Helena Ravenska's here, but there's a letter from her in the archives talking about how 2/3 of her faculty had been killed in the war, her own house and her school had been totally destroyed. And here she is in 1946 trying to rebuild, amazing people. And we are, however inadequately, trying to build on what they did. Another profound influence for me is, flip a little bit further along. Actually, this is a very early picture on the right of Catherine Kendall. And when I was beginning work on my doctoral dissertation, I wanted to write on a topic related to international education. And my advisor at Rutgers University said, you need to meet Catherine Kendall. Well, I didn't even know who she was, I'm sorry to admit, but I started researching who she was, and then I was really afraid to call her. So I wrote her a letter and asked if I could meet her. And she called me right back and said, come ahead, dearie. And that was the beginning for me of one of the most wonderful relationships I have ever had with a true giant in our field. And the only problem, Julie probably feels the same thing, is it's a very onerous kind of legacy to try to carry, because Catherine was active in this association through her 99th birthday, really active doing work. So she expects that of everybody that she, related to. That's a little heavy. So we were also asked to reflect. I'm jumping a bit here. We were asked to reflect on some of our leadership experiences within the IASSW. My first official role was as a member of the program committee in 1986. And I was not invited, I don't believe, because of any expertise or anything I'd done that deserved it. I believe I was invited because the program chair from Japan was married to a man who lived in Connecticut. And she wanted to be able to meet face-to-face with someone on her committee when she traveled to visit her husband, and I happened to live in Connecticut. So that was my first official role. And after that, you know, I did have some additional opportunities. We were asked to reflect on, I have this paper and then I forget to look at it. We were asked to, well, before I get into that, I just, you know, some of you talked about your very beginnings, and I think, you know, we all carry that with us too. What kind of, you know, what were our family experiences? And again, it might be, probably is my extreme naivete, but I was, I don't know, probably in university before I realized that there were people who didn't consider women equal, because that wasn't my family experience. I was the oldest child, and I guess my father just couldn't wait for a boy. So he just, you know, treated me like I was going to be important, took me to work with him, bought me an electric train. So I just never realized until I got into university that this was going to be a problem. Plus, I always thought all my aunts were just so smart and competent that it didn't occur to me that there were folks who didn't think that way. Within IASSW, we went through a period, as Lena said, and others have said, where the leadership was predominantly male for quite a long time, following my young husband, until Lena bravely stepped forward in the mid-90s to be our female president. Certainly there have been many women leaders in IASSW, and since then, and you would think that, therefore, gender issues might not be as prevalent. And during my long years of involvement, I think for the most part that has been true. But there have been times when I really felt there were power imbalances that were gendered. There was one incident I was going to describe it a little more fully, but I decided I will not. I want to protect the guilty. But, you know, where I was in a very small meeting with 3 men, and 2 of them were being very almost hostile and accusing me of causing problems. I really wasn't causing problems. I was pointing out some issues that I felt we needed to deal with. And the 3rd man said nothing, and after the meeting said, "Oh, you were totally right. They were just being awful." And I said, this isn't really the time to be saying that. So I think that sometimes, you know, even in our associations where there are gendered power imbalances going on, it's really hard for women to find support. So Darja asked if other women were supportive of, and for the most part I'd say yes, but not always. And there was the one position that I really probably sought was I wanted to be president of the North American region back in 2000. Now, that's not a very heavy position because it's a really, it's a region that struggles. And we don't really have, we have no money, we have very little program, but I had been involved in helping the region to get started in the early 90s and had put in an awful lot of effort. And the leadership rotates between countries, and it was the US's turn in 2000. And I really felt I deserved to be the president. And a woman from another country, and I don't really know why, but she was determined I was not going to be president. And she promoted aggressively a man who'd been almost hardly involved at all, very, very wonderful, nice man, to be president. He became president. Very sadly, 2 years later, he became very ill and had to withdraw, and by default, he did become president for 2 years. But that's really the only position I ever actually sought. And I do think sometimes with us women, we need to, maybe particularly of our generation, we need to think about ways in which we compete with each other, but not always above board and explicitly. We sort of have this little tension, but it's not so out in the open. Fortunately, a lot of those kinds of experiences eventually work themselves out, and people become very close friends. But it's something that puzzled me throughout my leadership career, that there is often, perhaps more with men, you know, the power plays are out in the open. You know what you're up against. But sometimes there is this subtle sort of behind-the-scenes competition, I think, among women leading. Overall, however, my experience in working in IASSW has been wonderful. Let me just give my concluding sentence. It's been a wonderful experience. It's been such a privilege to meet and work with people from all over the world. I'm still engaged a little bit. I'm chairing our archive committee, very interested in history. Show the other couple pictures of these two women. They have this incredible, if somebody should research this, the archive is full of their letters back and forth. Yeah. And the letters detail all the work they were doing, their opinions on the professional issues of the day, and their incredible friendship. It's really beautiful. So you should go to the archive, make a visit, and read these. And then I updated it with some of our wonderful new leaders. But we have served on the legacy of these brave, visionary, and dedicated women. And being involved has enriched my life and the life of my family, because my husband and son followed me around the world to IA meetings. When my son was 6, he goes, "Mom, are we invited to any good meetings this summer?" But I've had these wonderful, wonderful friendships. So many of you in this room are dear friends that I've made, and it's just such a wonderful thing, and I wish it for all of our students who are coming up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lynne. And we'll just go to the end. Okay. So the next speaker is Vishanthie Sewpaul.
Hello, you can all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. People tell me that I have a bulging microphone, so I don't think I need it. I can tell you a whole host of stories about the kinds of gendered racism that I've experienced, but I'm not going to do that. You've heard our previous speakers, and sometimes I feel that I carry the burden of my gender, my skin color, and my continent. All that you have to know is what Donald Trump thinks about us, and you know what many people across the world thinks about us. So I want to focus on some of the positives now. Thank you, Darja, for that flexibility that you've given us to structure this the way we want to. I want to start by quoting not a woman, but one great civil rights leader, Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "If it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures, like Beethoven composed music, like Shakespeare wrote poetry." I've abbreviated it a bit. "Sweep streets so well that all the hosts of the heaven and the earth will have to pause and say, 'Here lived a great street sweeper.' If you can't be a pine on top of the hill, be a shrub in the valley. If you can't be a sun, be a star. For it isn't by the size that you win or fall. Be the best of whoever you are." I quote that because I owe all that I am to my mother. My mother, who was not literate, but had wisdom far beyond all 7 of her children put together. My mother, who taught me all the values that Julia Watkins talked about, but more importantly, taught me about non-discrimination, and having had the wisdom to raise me in an environment, in a home with a multi-faith setting. And for that, I would always remain grateful. She raised me, I think, in the setting. She was a domestic worker. And when I paid tribute to my mother, I quoted Martin Luther King Jr. and I said, and here lived a great domestic worker. Because she did that with such integrity. She worked for one family for almost 40 years. Such was her honesty and her dedication. And she did that in the face of abandonment as well, because my dad died when I was 5 months of age. And he didn't just die, he died out of suicide. So my mother had to carry that stigma and that burden as well. But she never, ever carried the stain of victimhood. And I think that for me was the success of her life. Right? She never ever had a narrative of victimhood. And I think she's passed that on to me. Okay? Because I feel to do anything less would be a dishonor to what she has done in her life and the model that she served for me. In terms of my academic life and where I am today, I think one of the things that my mother was the victim of apartheid. And given the structure within which she operated, she normalized it. And given her normalization of it, I normalized it as well. And I can assure you that there were times in my life when I did feel that small. So what do I owe to the courage that I have today? One is my high school teacher who introduced me to Black consciousness. And amongst the many lessons, and the freeing forms of praxis that she used with us, is leaving me with one very important message. It's not your fault. And I can assure you it's something that I take into all my teaching. Making students believe in themselves, develop confidence and the self-esteem to actually understand themselves and in the world around them. Because without politicizing of the self, I don't think we're going to be able to engage in the world constructively. And then, there was another very simple question. Is this what you really want to do? That changed the trajectory of my life. And I think sometimes as social workers, we believe that we've got to do something absolutely tangible, to alter the quality of somebody's life. But after finishing high school, there was no money to go to university. And from the time I was in high school, all that I wanted to do was to be a social worker. But I was looking for a job because my mother couldn't afford sending me to university. And I was standing outside of her bank, and it was an acquaintance who knew me from school who passed by just by sheer accident. And he had the good sense to stop. And he asked me what I was doing, and I said I was applying for jobs. And he said, is this what you really want to do? And I said, no. I really want to go to university. I want to study social work, but this is the problem. And his next question was, did you try to get some help? I mean, I grew up in quite a conservative environment. Mother with 7 children, 6 of us girls, 1 boy, so it's not that I was worldly wise. I didn't even know that you could get some help. So, he suggested I go to child welfare and to what was at that time the Department of Home Affairs. But even they couldn't help me financially, right? And I even offered I would work, and study part-time, but they said that the laws didn't allow it. But there was one social worker at the Department of Child Welfare, and she said, you know what, you want to do this so much. Go to CM Basa and Company, she told me where it was, apply for a loan, a student loan, go and register, and your family will be so proud of you that somehow they will support you. And that's exactly what I did. You know, again, to show that it's not the material things. It's the faith, it's the validation, you know, and a little bit of advice and direction that helped me get to where I am. I entered, and I think I wasn't going to blow away the experience, the opportunity. So I think for me, you know, like, success means striving for excellence all the time. You know, since I was at university, it was too hard to get there, and I wasn't going to blow it away. I entered ISSW about 18 years ago, so I don't have the kind of history that some of my colleagues have. But Lena Dominelli was president at that time. And again, it was one of the people who believed in me. So Lena, thank you so much. And I remember my first board meeting, Lena proposes, well, she introduces the idea of global standards for social work, education, and training. And I respond with, it's absolutely crazy. It's a preposterous idea. It smacks of imperialism. We can't do it. You know, and Lena turns around to me and says, well, because you understand the complexities around it, I want you to chair it. You know? And I thought, well, you know, I would have like-minded people. I'll talk to a couple of people. They will say, no, we don't want this. I go back to the board and report that it's not going to be done because people don't want it. You know, my job is over. That didn't happen. People actually wanted it. So over a 4-year period of consultations, you know, we did it. But I think I learned a lot from that. You know, there were competing and conflicting ideas from one end of the spectrum to the other, but the ability to listen, take into account multiple voices, and put it together and try eventually to reach consensus. And that document was unanimously adopted in 2004. And 2004, yes. Yeah, and for punishment, as punishment for that, right, then I was asked to chair the Global Definition Committee, right? And again, you know, went through huge periods of consultations and so on, and we managed to get that done and get that adopted in 2014, I think. And again, you know, if you do something, then you get more work to do. I got to chair the Global Ethics Committee. And that's one of the most daunting things I've ever done. I mean, try to talk about ethics, you know, for every argument that we have, we can provide multiple counter-arguments. So trying to develop a statement of ethics to represent social work on a global level has actually been extremely challenging, but I'm pleased to say that we had the statement adopted. IFSW in a briefer form, ISSW in its more expanded form at meetings here in Dublin. Now, yesterday morning, I was, how many minutes, right? Okay, I was talking to a colleague, and he helped to check the Japanese translation, and he said, the global ethics document is very complex, you know. And he said, it's okay for me because I'm interested in anti-oppressive practice and human rights and so on, but for many of my colleagues, you know, it's not where they are. And he says, the document asks for a paradigm shift. And my question was, but does the profession need a paradigm shift? And he said, oh yes. You know, and I said, well, that's what it's about. You know, we don't have to be there, but these documents lend direction and vision for where we need to take the profession to. And from that point of view, I feel like I'm in an extremely privileged space to have had the opportunity to shape the global standards document, to shape the global definition in some ways, and to shape the global ethics, because it's infused with certain types of thinking that I hope will become the future of so. It's very much the present as well, I think, because if it wasn't, we would not have so many social work academics and researchers and social work practitioners who've linked into it for us to adopt it. But we hope that these will become more entrenched in the profession as we go along. I'm not going to go into too much. I've organized several things, nationally and internationally. One of the biggest was the 2008 conference, which we really organized against the odds. I remember sitting there in the committee and some of them saying, we either postpone this conference, right, or cancel it altogether. And I had no idea where I had the courage from. And I said, that will not happen. And why? Because I was carrying the burden of my continent, right? I said, enough people think of us as belonging to the Cinderella continent, as people who are inadequate. We can't do it. And I said, I do not want to really force that. But also in 1990, when I attended my first ever Global Social Work Conference, I went back to university. At that time, South Africa was, in fact, the pariah of the world in view of apartheid, and it would never have been considered to host an international conference there. But I went back and I wrote a status spread for our university magazine about the conference in Peru. And I said, hopefully someday soon, South Africa will be ready to host a prestigious event like this. So I think it's that for me, to have a vision, the power to dream, and to take concerted action to realize that dream, I think is part of global leadership as well. But it also means courage in the face of not knowing what the precise outcomes will be. Because with the 2008 conference, I didn't know. I think I told Lena, there are times when I thought I may have to sell my house and my car and everything else because I didn't know whether we were going to come out of it financially. We also underestimate the power of support in our lives. I wouldn't have done it without the support of many colleagues around me from South Africa and across the world. Antoinette Lombard and I go back, over 30 years, and we've remained great friends and colleagues over time. As leaders, we often do not want to talk about disappointment, but I think it's important that we do, right? I've stood twice for presidency of IASSW, and it went to worthier colleagues, right? And sometimes I think we use masculine language of win and lose, which I do not like. So it went to worthier colleagues. So I want to conclude by quoting Mandela, who said, "Do not judge me by my successes. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again." Thank you.
The next speaker is our current president of IASSW, Annamaria.
Thank you so much, Darja. I wrote my speech because I feel not enough confident to speak without having the text in what is not my first language. And as Darja asked us, I started to look at my story. I was born in Parma, in Italy, in 1950, just after the Second World War. And my generation was exposed to the efforts of our parents to absorb the experience of war and to move beyond the creeping legacy of fascism, occupation, and civil war. Although poverty and deprivation were acute, particularly in rural South and Northeast, I have been lucky, as my family was middle class and I have had a quite comfortable childhood. From the late 50s to the early 60s, Italian society was transformed by an economic boom with internal migration from south to north and from countryside to the town. This new period of affluence was bringing a new consumer society. To Italy too, phone, cars, television, fridge, washing machine were the most important technical supplies in the daily life. The culture at that time was still characterized by a preferential status and treatment given to men that were known as the head for the family, the breadwinner. They didn't contribute much to the housework, but spent most of their time working to earn money. Women were the soul of the family. Their jobs were to take care of the houseworks and look after children. My mother was born in Sardinia, but moved very young in Piedmont, studied as a teacher, and was working in Turin as the first Italian telephone company when she met my father during the war. They got married in 1948 and subsequently moved from Turin to Parma, a smaller and more conservative town, where living with my father's family, she was asked to quit her job, as it was considered not appropriate for a lady due to the involvement of night shifts. She accepted these rules, and when she became pregnant, she adopted for a male because she thought that the life was easier for a man. But she got me as a daughter, and only 3 years later, a boy. I was not the ordinary girl, not so interested in dolls and in female games, but more in books. As my father was working as a sales agent and was traveling for most of the week, it was my mother who was responsible for my education. She was very strict on what should be a proper behavior for a girl, but at the same time, she gave me a lot of freedom. I had the opportunity to study piano, to choose the high school I wanted to go, to participate to associations, and to have a lot of friends and do many activities of diverse kind. I think she had been able to develop a very good attachment. She loved me, but she never obsessed me. Basically, she was not the stereotypical Italian mother, hand looking after her chicks. That left me open to experiment myself in many groups, and I had my first experience in a leadership position when I was 13 years old. I remember my first public speech held in a church theater was about the leprosy problem and the care of the affected people. The church was run by missionaries, so I had the possibility to open a window to the world, South America, Africa, Asia, and all their problems were discussed with privileged witnesses. Thanks to these experiences, I have been interested in social problems since I was very young. And in my family there was also a very open environment. We hosted a student from Congo, a young man arrived from southern Italy to work in Parma, and every afternoon an old lady and a profoundly deaf lady, both without family, visited our house for a cup of tea with us. This has been my personal background, and after my high school I have chosen to social work path at Parma University. I graduated in '72, and I have had the opportunity to live the golden age of social service in Italy, participating to the students and workers movement, taking part in the active psychiatry movement, actively engaging in the institutionalization process, and working with disabled people and their families. That was my first job as a social worker. The feminist wave was also a very important bottom-up driver in our society, both with the fight for the divorce and abortion law and the creation of family counseling centers. I was involved in the opening of the first center in Parma, cooperating with Women Association linked with the Left Party and Catholic Church, both united in the same vision of women liberation. I have never seen myself as a fighter against the male gender, but more as a person that should have the same value, a person who considers the difference that we have as a richness, but that also pretends equality, freedom, and right of self-determination. This has been always for me a central point, to respect the dignity and the peculiarity of every human being, and not to discriminate them in relation to their gender, ethnicity, religion, or any other characteristic. As a woman, I want to be as I am, with my specific attitude. I don't want to cancel my diversity. I don't want to adopt male stances, and I don't want to adhere to a predefined model, both the old or the new one. The past tradition has changed over time in Italy. Being the role of mother and wife is no longer enticing in Italian culture. Currently, women participate in every aspect of political, economic, and social life, and are more educated than men. 59 of graduates bachelor level are women. They enter into jobs that before were only for men, lawyers, doctors, architects, engineers, and they have been accepted in the military and police forces. Nevertheless, several sources of data suggested that Italy remains fairly traditional on this front, and now more than before, unfortunately. Women labor force participation rate is at or near the lowest in Europe, depending on the age group. The salary is not aligned with the one of the men, and sexual, domestic, and gender-based violence is still a very serious problem. We have a lot of women that have been killed by husband, by partner in the house, killed with the children, so this is very, very huge problem. Italy has a history of treating women as a sexual object, and this cultural trait has a long-reaching grasp on contemporary Italian society that has also been supported by the Berlusconian era with these misogynistic antics and these rubbish TV programs that contributed to create a common aspiration in some young girls to become showgirls when they grow up. While the law may change, the power imbalance between genders remain ingrained in traditional society. In this context, I have found a very important support in my husband. I have married quite a young age, 21st, with my husband who was a physicist working in the IT sector, and I was subsequently employed as a social worker whilst studying for a degree in sociology and participating in conferences and adjournment courses. We decided to have children only when I was 30 and he was 35. And we decided together to have 3 children. We got 1 daughter and 2 sons. But our pact was that I would continue to work, even as we were raising our family, and this help was substantial. I had my career development at the same time as I had my children. I followed a family therapy course. I started to work as a freelance in continuing education and supervision activities. I published my first book at the same time of the birth of my 3rd child. And I also attended the first PhD course in social work organized by Trieste University in the 90s. I had the opportunity to participate in the Erasmus project since this is inception, and I promoted and was the chair for 6 years of the thematic network at European level. And my lifestyle was quite different from the one of my friend. I was going around in Italy first and then in Europe as well, alone, teaching and giving speeches, while leaving my children at home with my husband. I tried to teach them to be as autonomous as possible, exposing them to a multicultural environment from a very young age. I have never experienced discrimination in my career by men, or other kind of disrespect, nor in family, nor in work context. For sure I have been lucky, but at the same time I think that never disowning my female characteristic, I have used persistent authoritativeness in pursuing a clear objective that was to demonstrate the importance of social work as a discipline and a profession. In this journey, I have had some women who have been for me not only point of reference and mentorship, but also that have supported me, giving me the opportunity to grow in my leadership. I want to mention Liliana Nardini, the social work school director in Parma University, who bettered me, offering in 1975 a contract to teach at a diploma course with only 3 years of practice experience. And that always supported me in my progression of the study. Giovanna Nicoli, my social work mentor during my social work course, who has been a point of reference for all my professional life, reading my articles and books and giving me important advices. Maria del Corpo Monticelli, who been the only professor in social work in Italy for 20 years, encouraged me in pursuing my career. Cristina Bonte, former European Association President, who asked me to enter as a board member and then pushed me to candidate as a successor in the presidency of the European Association. And finally, Julia Watkins nominated me for the election in this position as a president of the International Association. And Lena, Dominelli, Angie, Yuen, Lynne, who have been in different moments important advisors during these last 2 years of presidency. Many other women in the board of the International Association, and more in general in my professional life, have had an important role. I cannot quote all of them. But I have also to say that it is in the feminine social work and university context that I have found a lot of tension and difficulties, and sometimes also direct attacks. Social work is a female profession. Its function has been repeatedly described and characterized as an extension of the traditional female nurturing role and the work that women do at home as take care of a person. However, having a numerical majority does not automatically translate into having power or control. As many research underline, male social workers disproportionately have managerial position. So a tricky question that myself always ask: why women don't support other women? Why they don't create alliance to ameliorate their position? Is part of the patriarchal mindset where women don't trust other women, or they don't want to see another woman succeed in higher position and therefore prefer to see a man in a leadership role? How much is in the cultural background or in a sort of passive consent that allowed them to criticize the status quo without taking any initiative to change things? And in another woman accept this challenge, showing that it's possible to take a leader's position, it is easier to hit her in the back or to render her life difficult instead of giving support and follow her, possibly for envy and jealousy. I don't have a precise answer, but unfortunately, I have found this pattern many times, both at local and micro and also in higher level. I want to finish just with the senses. I know that being in the leadership position, you have to be competent in relation to contents, confident in yourself, in your capabilities, and you have to work hard. My way of achieving it has been grounded in some specific attitude. I try to increase my listening skill, to look at things from different points of view, to consult people, ask opinions, but be kind, but firm, and then to take my own responsibility in a decision. I work to create a network, to develop cooperative atmosphere, respecting diversity. I hope to continue to serve in the International Association, to promote excellence in social work teaching, and I am committed, together with the women of the committee, to enhance programs and research that take in more consideration the gender issue with a strategic approach to prepare future social workers to occupy leadership positions, both in education and in practice. Thank you very much.
So now we are going to see a very short video by the former President Angelina Wang.
Good morning. This is Angie from Hong Kong. I'm sorry that I cannot attend the Dublin conference because of some other engagement. My apology. I have been asked to share my personal experience as a woman leader. Firstly, I would not claim myself as a woman leader, but I would like to share with you my thoughts on the topic. Regarding my upbringing, I am extremely privileged that I was born into a very loving family. My mother prayed for more than 10 years for a girl, and she thought that a girl can be an angel who can bring blessing to other people. And she taught me to be loving and to serve others. And she has been an extremely open and given me a lot of freedom. So I'm really indebted to her. And I also have a domestic helper who brought me up, and I call her Armor, And she was from a very rich family, but she ran away from her home because her husband had a second wife, and also her husband was very abusive. She ran away from her home in Wuhan, China, and ran all the way to China, to Hong Kong, and took up the post of being a domestic helper in my home. And she has been an extremely good example to me, because she told me that a woman has to be courageous, a woman has to be independent, and also, you know, we should withstand challenges and hurdles, and should try to pursue our potential, you know, without, you know, just submitting to the dominance of men. So I think she has a great impact on me as a woman leader. And when I went to school, I was also privileged in joining an extremely good Christian school. And my principal was extremely progressive in education. She advocated for all-round education, and also she brought in to school a lot of new innovations, including you know, a lot of opportunities for us to be involved as volunteers, even working with you know, delinquents. And also she brought in to our school blind students and given them a lot of opportunities, and asked us and educated us to be loving and caring to those that are underprivileged. And I think her experience and her example has helped me a lot as an educator, because she advocated that education should be a catalyst for social change and development. And I believe this to this day, that education should be a catalyst for social change and development. And also, when I became a social worker, I was extremely privileged, because when I joined social work in Hong Kong in the 70s and 80s, that was a time for the great expansion in social work. So we had a lot of opportunities to be engaged in advocacy for new services, in developing new social service policies. And you know, when we have dreams and we have ideas, then a lot of times these ideas were being actualized and being implemented. And actually, I also helped in advocating for the maternity leave for women employees in the 1970s, the late 1970s. So there were a lot of opportunities, so nothing was impossible to me, because I could see that when we have ideas, when we have vision, when we have purpose, then a lot of times nothing is impossible, and we can pursue our dream without a lot of obstacles. So gender was not my obstacle. And I can see that if we have the ability, we have the ideas, and we have the courage, then most of the time we are able to actualize what we believe in. And so that was my experience as a social worker. Later on, I had the opportunity to join university and taught social work in universities. I taught in Singapore and later come back to Hong Kong. And I was, you know, extremely privileged too to be able to work with many good colleagues and friends. And then we were able to develop new curriculum. And also, for example, we also developed the first Master in Social Work program in the Chinese mainland. And when at that time there was no such program in China, so we were given a lot of freedom to experiment on new programs and worthwhile and meaningful programs without much obstacles. I had a lot of male.
The video got cut. Thank you to Angelina Juan for this input. And now we go to our last presentation, which is presentation of former president of IASSW, Vimla Nadkarni. And since we record all of the session, I will, after 5 minutes, I will stop the video that we will still have the time for a couple of questions and to end today's session. And also, I invite you then to go back to the session, because it will be on the website of the IASSW, and you can use it for teaching and for other sources.
Dear President Annamaria and Chairperson Darja of this Women's Leadership Panel, thank you for inviting me to make this brief video presentation. I am so happy to be with you all virtually, if not physically. I begin with reminding ourselves about the status of women globally, the exploitation, oppression, discrimination, and disempowerment they face even today. We sitting in this beautiful environment are privileged women. While several of us may have come up from poverty or an abusive childhood, we are still better off than the 1.3 billion people who live in absolute poverty around the globe, of whom 70% are women. For these women, poverty doesn't mean scarcity and want. It means rights denied, opportunities curtailed, and voices silenced. Women work 2/3 of the world's working hours, according to the United Nations Millennium Campaign, and earn only 10% of the world's income. I am part of the privileged community of social work educators, having been the first Indian president of IASW from 2012 to 2016. And considering women's oppressed status globally, we have a great responsibility as women to address some of these issues as an association through our Cocos, as well as in collaboration with our partners locally, nationally, regionally, and internationally. I am proud to be a woman in this man's world, and despite them, I have been empowered enough to steam forward with confidence and fearlessness in our profession. Fortunately, the 3 men and women in my life, my father, my brother, my husband, my mother and sister. My mother, a strong woman who became a widow in her 40s and had to look after all of us, which she did with equanimity. They all imbibe in us the values of giving dignity and respect to all, regardless of gender, color, religion, disability, and so on. We are Catholic, Muslim, and non-Hindu men in marriage in my family, and also American and Canadian spouses of my nieces. My father, a world-famous engineer and entrepreneur, established the first ice cream factory, Joy, in Asia. He encouraged all of us to go into the male-dominated professions, namely engineering and medicine. My brother, of course, had no choice but to be dominated by so many sisters, women power in the family. My husband has been most supportive throughout my career, and he has played a seminal role in looking after our only daughter when I traveled. She is now a scientist in Berkeley, California. I feel privileged to be a member of a woman-dominated discipline and profession, the social work profession, and always being challenged to provide leadership throughout my career as both practitioner and educator. Being the sole medical social worker at AEM Hospital, a large public hospital in Mumbai, and then head of the department of Medical and Psychiatric Social Work for 20 years at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Secretary General of Family Planning Association of India, thereafter Dean of School of Social Work and President of ISW. As Secretary General in a national organization with a strict hierarchy and dichotomy between volunteers and executive staff, I had to be accepted in an administrative and non-academic role. Males dominated some of the branches, especially in the north of India, and this did lead to conflicts which were sometimes gender-based. But being supported by my president, a very assertive woman, I did not have to fear the bullying tactics that were used sometimes by my male counterpart.
I'm sorry that I have to close it, but the video is 15 minutes, so you are welcome to watch it afterwards in a couple of weeks when it will be online. Thank you so much to everybody who spoke today. The women's stories always make us laugh and also cry. And all of the stories reminded me at the importance of solidarity and also how important it is to be supported. And also the importance of equality and also how complex the women's lives are. It's always about personal and professional and political, and of course personal is political, and also how important it is that women get support in their professional lives. So we have a few minutes. I would like to invite the speakers on here in front of the audience, and please we will take 1-2 questions or questions, comments? Yes?
First of all, thank you for your captivating and powerful stories. That was really inspiring. I work with lots of students of social work and in our association in Germany of social workers, and I would ask you, how can I help as a man empowering women, not empowering women, but how can I help trying to formulate what I'm saying while I'm saying it. I'm trying to say, how can I encourage and empower my colleagues and my co-students to seek leadership positions and to support them on their way to those positions, because often we have the problem in Germany that we have like an 85% women in social work and 15% men, and most of the leadership positions in associations and at work are held by men, and yeah.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Very good question. I have, we'll try to be brief, but I have 2 points to make. One, Michael Oliver, disabled activist, said, social workers can't empower service users or women, you can only stop disempowering them. So that's one message. The other one is that actually it's really important to change men's behavior. So I think you can do a lot in that, because it reminds me, in 1986, when the Women's Caucus was started under my leadership, we did a survey, global, and we had, I've forgotten exactly how many replies. What was interesting was that in the developing, industrialized world, men dominated the leadership positions and women did the basic lecturing and the fieldwork. In the industrializing world, the global south as we call it now, it was the other way around. And the only exception in the industrialized West was Israel. Israel had women in leadership. And it really breaks my heart to hear that we're still in the same place according to your experience in Germany. So please change the position of men, change men's behavior.
So we're taking one more question.
I would like to disagree with Lena about the issue of empowerment. We cannot give power to other people, but we can give them opportunities to get power or to take power. And this is more important than just stopping inequality. But the question that I did want to put to the distinguished group here, my sense is of increasing pessimism because of what we see in the world today, which actually is worse than what was the case 10 years ago. And this applies to social work too, and in the South as well as in the North. So the question is, what advice can you give to new social workers?
I think, for me, that's been one of the most difficult sort of aspects of this part of my life, because I realize now I'm, at the point of there aren't as many years left as the ones I'm looking back at. And I think 30 years ago I thought, when we went through difficult times, oh well, I've got plenty of time to see it get better. So, I share with you this sense of, especially in my own country, the United States, just the fact that we are galloping backwards, we're not just moving backwards. I guess I took some heart from two things. One is actually my role as chair of the archive committee, and that sounds a little weird, but in looking back and thinking about, and even reflecting on what my parents went through, which I didn't ever ask them about, but think about the generation before us that grew up during the Depression, economic depression, and then the World War, the devastation. How did they have the strength to carry on? What did they think was going to be the world ahead of them? And somehow things turned around. People had incredible strength and built. The second thing is seeing around the world, and certainly in the US, the tremendous protests that have been just exploded because of the outrageousness of the policy. So it seems that there are a lot of people, including young people, who really are mobilized to say, there are certain things that are totally unacceptable. And I think it was so powerful when all of our former first ladies spoke out against the Trump administration's policy on the borders. And Laura Bush wrote a powerful op-ed that was published in the major newspapers. And it was really, this was wonderful. That has never happened before in our country. So I thought that was just amazing.
Thank you so much. This was a fantastic session. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us. I think that thinking back to Ali Salomon, we can think, what would Ali Salomon say after 100 years? When we have to imagine that at that time women almost didn't go to the university. So this was in 100 years, wow, what an achievement. At the same time, we have to be aware that to the fact, as Shula said, that fundamentalist neoliberalism wants to wipe away women's rights, and we will not allow this to happen. And certainly not educators in social work, and certainly not family social workers, and certainly not men who are thinking like you are thinking. And so thank you very much for everybody to join this fabulous session.
Thank you very much for organizing that. It would never happen without your energy and vision.
Thank you.
Thank you.